Look at your street right now, parked cars, closed doors, maybe a neighbor who waves from a distance. But in 1960, that same street was a living, breathing social ecosystem. People walked, kids played. The corner store was open, everyone knew everyone. What happened? It wasn't an accident, it wasn't inevitable, it was a decision. And later in this video, I'm going to show you a photograph of a completely ordinary American street from 1965, with something in the background that nobody noticed at the time, something that predicted exactly what was coming. Stay with me, because once you see it, you'll never look at your street the same way again. Let me tell you about Margaret. Margaret lived on Elm Street in Columbus, Ohio. Every morning at 7:15, she walked 3 houses down to the corner bakery. Not just for bread, for the conversation. There was Frank behind the counter, who knew her husband's name and asked about her daughter's piano lessons. There was the mailman who stopped in for coffee. There was old Bill from number 42, who always had an opinion about the weather. In 15 minutes, Margaret had touched 5 lives. And 5 lives had touched hers. This wasn't unusual, this was Tuesday. This daily ritual, repeated millions of times on millions of streets across America, was the invisible infrastructure of community life. Not the houses, not the roads, the people moving through shared space, maintaining the social bonds that held everything together. Sociologists call this incidental social contact, and research shows it is one of the most powerful predictors of neighborhood safety, mental health, and community cohesion ever identified. Margaret's morning walk wasn't just a trip to the bakery, it was the glue that held her street together. By 1975, the bakery was gone, and so was the glue. So what happened to Margaret's bakery? The answer is something called Euclidean zoning, and it is probably the single most consequential urban planning decision in American history, and almost nobody has heard of it. Here's how it worked. Beginning in the 1920s and accelerating dramatically in the post-war era, city planners across America began separating land uses by zone. Residential areas here, commercial areas there. Industrial zones somewhere else entirely. The idea sounded reasonable. Keep factories away from homes, keep traffic away from schools. But the implementation went much further than that. Under strict Euclidean zoning, a bakery on a residential street became illegal. A barber shop on a neighborhood corner, illegal. A small grocery store 3 blocks from your house, illegal. The corner store didn't close because people stopped wanting it. It closed because the law said it couldn't exist. And when it closed, something happened that the planners never predicted. People stopped walking when Margaret had to drive 20 minutes to a shopping mall for her bread. She didn't stop for a conversation. She didn't run into Frank or the mailman or old Bill. She went in, she bought her bread, and she came home. The street that had once been a social ecosystem became a corridor, a place you passed through, not a place where you lived. Zoning didn't work alone, it had a powerful partner, the automobile. The Federal Highway Act of 1956 poured billions of dollars into building roads that connected suburbs to city centers, and those roads required something that would reshape every American neighborhood forever. Parking. Think about what parking does to a street. It pushes buildings back from the sidewalk. It eliminates the stoops, the awnings, the doorways where people naturally gathered. It creates dead zones, vast empty surfaces that nobody walks across if they can help it. Jane Jacobs, the most important urban thinker of the 20th century, saw this happening in real time. In her 1961 masterwork, she wrote that cities need a most intricate and close-grained diversity to stay alive. Parking lots and wide roads were the opposite of that. She was ignored. The roads were built, the parking lots spread, the suburbs expanded, and the streets that had once been alive went quiet. Here's something the history books often skip. The highways that were built through American cities in the 1950s and 60s were not routed randomly. They were consistently, deliberately routed through the neighborhoods that had the least political power to resist: black neighborhoods, working-class neighborhoods, immigrant neighborhoods. In Nashville, Interstate 40 was routed directly through the heart of the city's black business district, destroying 650 homes and 27 businesses in a community that had taken generations to build. In New Orleans, the Claiborne Avenue Expressway was built over a thriving street that had been the social and economic center of black community life for decades. The oak trees that lined the avenue, under which people had gathered, celebrated, and mourned for generations, were cut down. In city after city, the same story. A community that had taken 50 years to build the trust, the institutions, the social capital, the collective efficacy, was destroyed in 18 months of construction. And the people who lost their homes weren't compensated fairly. They weren't given equivalent housing in equivalent neighborhoods. They were scattered. Their community was gone. This wasn't a side effect. Research by urban historian Robert Caro and others has documented that in many cases it was the intention. At the same time, the highways were tearing through neighborhoods. The economic foundation beneath them was crumbling. American manufacturing, the industry that had given working-class neighborhoods their stability for generations, began its long decline in the 1960s. Between 1979 and 1983 alone, the United States lost over 2.3 million manufacturing jobs. In cities like Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh, entire industries collapsed within a decade. But here's what the statistics don't capture. When the factory on the edge of a neighborhood closed, it wasn't just jobs that disappeared. It was the diner where workers ate lunch, the hardware store where they bought tools on Saturday, the bar where they unwound on Friday evening. It was the entire economic ecosystem that had grown up around stable employment over decades. And when those businesses closed, the street lost something just as important as the money. It lost the daily routines that brought people together, the incidental contacts, the glue. Remember Margaret and her morning bakery visit? The factory closing was the same story at scale, multiplied across thousands of neighborhoods, across hundreds of cities, across 2 decades. Remember, at the beginning of this video, I promised to show you a photograph of an ordinary American street from 1965, with something in the background that predicted exactly what was coming. Here it is. Look at the background. See that empty lot on the corner? That's where the corner store used to be. It closed 2 years before this photo was taken, not because business was bad, but because the new zoning ordinance made it illegal to operate a commercial business in a residential zone. The family who owned it moved away, the building was demolished, and the lot sat empty. Within 10 years, 4 more families on that block had moved away. The school 2 streets over lost enough students to close a classroom. The church on the next block lost its congregation. 1 empty lot, 1 zoning decision, 1 corner store that was told it couldn't exist anymore. That's how it started, not with a dramatic collapse, with a quiet, bureaucratic decision that nobody voted on and almost nobody noticed, until the street was silent. So why doesn't your street look like 1960 anymore? Because a series of decisions made by planners, politicians, and developers systematically removed everything that made a street a community rather than just a road with houses on it, the corner store, the walkable street, the economic anchor of the factory, the social infrastructure of the neighborhood institution. None of it disappeared by accident. All of it can be understood. And understanding it is the first step towards something better. Some communities are rebuilding these things right now, changing zoning laws to allow corner stores again, investing in walkable streets, Creating the third places where people can gather without agenda. It's possible, it's happening, and it starts with knowing what was lost and why. Do you remember the last corner store on your street, the last place where you ran into your neighbors without planning to? Leave the name and your best memory in the comments because these stories matter. They're not just nostalgia, they're a blueprint. Subscribe to Back in Time USA. We tell stories like this every week.